I can't wait to run out of money so I can stop gambling, but I won't stop gambling until I run out of money. Finally run out of money. I walk out, I'm thinking, okay, it's Saturday morning. I've been here overnight. Let me get in the car, go home, be depressed like I normally am, and I can get through this. So I get in the car, I turn on the car, and I hear Sunday morning music, and I'm like, why is there Sunday morning music on Saturday? Well, it was actually Sunday. So I had been there for 36 hours, blew every single penny that I had, lost a day without realizing it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Dave Yeager, an Army veteran who now uses his voice as well as his writing to express his experience with gambling addiction and now gambling addiction recovery. Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for those that don't know you, and you're becoming a very familiar face around the space, so there are some that will know you. But for those that aren't familiar with you, what's a little bit of context about you? How did we end up here today?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an 11-year veteran of the Army, and actually fell into my gambling addiction while I was on active duty. It was not too long after 9/11, and I was stationed in Korea. I was in my first marriage, had 2 young kids under the age of 5. There was so much stress going on at the time. Flew over there, got into country. Now I'm 12 hours separated, so I'm tired, I'm stressed, everything else. I get settled into the hotel on the base in Yongsan in Seoul, walking around because I'm not ready to sleep yet, and discover a casino-style slot room right there on the military base, which they don't have here in the States, and I didn't know they had them overseas. I had no clue. So I'm like, okay, I'm from Pennsylvania. I used to go to Atlantic City when I was younger and could get away with, spend an amount of money and no big deal. So I took a couple $100 out, sat down, and it wasn't too long until I started to feel relaxed, and then made, and I say this all the time, one of the biggest mistakes a budding compulsive gambler can make, and I won. And I didn't break the bank. Wasn't thrown out of the place, but it was enough in that moment that I can remember kind of all the stress, the anxiety, all the fear melted away in that moment for a short period of time. And I liked that feeling. So I basically spent the remainder of that year in Korea chasing that feeling because I loved it. And what started off as the occasional visit to the game room turned out to an obsession of pretty much 7 days a week, lunch breaks, making up excuses because I was the enlisted person in charge of my squad. So I could pretty much, kind of make the rules from that standpoint. And I would say I have this meeting, that meeting, and then I'd run over to the game room, to borrowing money from my subordinates, which you should never, ever do in a military situation, to then stealing from my own unit. And while all this is happening, I earned one of the hardest badges to earn in the Army, the Expert Field Medical Badge. I helped a couple other soldiers get it too. I'm working on people with promotions. I developed a training program that my command was using in other squads throughout the peninsula. So all these good things are happening right alongside this growing obsession that I can't get rid of and I can't shake. The stealing immediately generated an investigation to which I pulled them aside and said, look, don't waste your time. And I confessed right then and there. I told them what I had done. I was so ashamed of myself and what I had become and had no idea how I even got there. They sent me back to Seoul to my command, where I sat in front of my colonel, who basically said, we don't know what to do with you because you've got all these great things happening. There's just this one character thing. And that's of note. That's something to remember, this one character thing, because that's kind of a repetitive theme in my military career. So then I was reduced by 1 rank. That was all that had happened in that moment. Because in the meantime, I had returned all the money that I stole. It wasn't a whopper of an amount of money, but it was still, it's on a federal installation. It was a federal crime.
Right.
And much, much worse could have happened to me. But because of the other things that I was doing, they were more or less overlooked, or put into perspective, maybe is a better way of saying it. So then I was sent to my first sergeant, my enlisted leader, who then did my year-end non-commissioned officer evaluation report. And I got the highest marks you can get in almost every category except for one, which was character. So again, this character thing comes up. The scary part about that is that the word gambling was never mentioned in all of that.
When people think about addictions, a lot of times they'll point to the fact that it takes a long time for someone to get to the point that they want help because people can be high functioning. We hear the term high functioning alcoholic all the time. Would you, looking back, call yourself a high functioning gambler?
No doubt. No doubt. I could stand in front of you maybe not you specifically, but I could stand in front of you rhetorically
Mm,
and have a perfectly good conversation with you, and you would never have a clue that this was happening.
mm,
I did my job every single day. I got done what I was supposed to get done. I didn't miss days of work. I'd
mm,
pull myself out of work when I knew I could, but I never missed a day of work, and I never fell short on what I was supposed to do. So yes,
mm.
absolutely high functioning.
And within that as well, we're going to be posting this on Veterans Day. Is gambling a big problem in the military, or were you like one of the only people that fell into this?
No, it's a problem. And when I was in these game rooms, I saw who the other people were
Mm,
in these game rooms. And now, since here in the States, most of the states in the United States have, approved online casino, online sports betting. It's even more magnified. Most of the studies that are out there right now say that we, military service members and veterans, run about twice the risk of developing this addiction of our civilian counterparts.
wow.
Yeah. And the reasons for that are, number one, you're taking a very, for the most part, young group of people, right? A young competitive group of people, and
Mm,
you're throwing them in an environment where you're taught from day one to leave your problems at the door because we have a mission to accomplish. It's understandable. When you're in the military, we do have a mission to accomplish. I was taught in the Army early on that our job is to deter war, but if we can't deter it, win.
mm,
And that's hard to do when you're constantly distracted. So you have to leave your baggage at the door. The problem with that is when the mission's done and you get back, how do you unpack that baggage?
yeah.
Right? How do you sort through all the things? And while you're on the mission, in many cases, there's baggage being added to it. Any combat veteran will tell you that.
Mm,
Any veteran who isn't a combat veteran will tell you that, because you're moving every couple of years. You're always in situations where you're in high stress training. You're preparing for war.
mm,
The job of the military, no matter what your job is to prepare for what your job is during war,
mm.
right? And that can be stressful. And
Yeah.
so, how do you unpack that? Some men and women will turn to alcohol. Some men and women do fine with it and they process it. Others might turn to drugs. A good percentage, upwards of at last good count that they had with a lot of the studies, most of the civilian population, they say it's around 1 to 2%. Any more in the military, you're talking closer 3 to 4%.
Mm,
And there was one study done where the group was not an insignificant number of people. 70% of the active duty service members that they did the interview with
mm,
showed signs of problematic gambling. So there's an across the board numbers of how prevalent it really is.
mm. It seems that you're pointing more towards this type of escape gambling that we hear floated around a lot, which doesn't always, within the civilian population, doesn't always really apply so often to men. That's more of a type of gambling that we see people that get drawn into slot machines do, which is more often than not women. That is a changing demographic now with online gambling for sure. But looking back, so you were gambling in Seoul, you were gambling in Korea. Do you feel like you were trying to escape those feelings of stress that you were having as the commanding officer in your unit?
I was trying to recreate the feeling that I felt of not feeling burdened, not feeling
Mm,
weighed down. Right? I did not deal well with stress. I didn't deal well with anxiety. I got through it. I was able to do my job, but I needed somewhere to go with that.
mm,
So yeah, it was an escape for me, but there's also, a level in the military of the understimulated gambler. I had a good friend of mine who was in the 3rd Marines, which was the original wave to go into Fallujah during the attack on Iraq, right?
mm,
And the things that they did there, and without getting into the stories, they were so high paced and so high adrenaline that when he got out of the military, he could never recreate the feeling that he had when he was there.
mm,
Right. So, what'll happen with the understimulated gambler is in the military situation is they're trying to recreate that high stress, high adrenaline. And if you
mm,
talk to any adrenaline junkies, they're always trying to recreate that adrenaline. When it's that high of a level, it's almost impossible to recreate. So these are the guys out there doing the sports betting. These are the guys
mm,
standing in front of the roulette wheel with all their pals behind them and, showing off just how well they're doing. They're out there too. But yes, probably a large portion of us are, and I'll speak for myself. I was an escape gambler. I
mm,
did not want to deal with a lot of different things. I was constantly arguing with my first wife when I would call her.
mm,
I missed my kids who were both under the age of 5, and I didn't get to see them. And back then, if you got to see them on video, it was grainy at best.
mm.
So even then, I didn't get to see them. So there was a lot of stress, a lot of fear, and a lot of anger and pain that I just didn't want to deal with.
Sure. There's a lot to unpack still within that story, and we can go deeper in a little bit. But for the sake of, laying out the timeline here, you're now in Seoul and you're getting ready to come back to the United States. Is that the case?
Yeah, I left for Korea in November 2001, so about a month and a half after the events of 9/11. So now we're back to basically October going into November of 2002. So it's almost a year later. I'm
Okay.
back in Seoul because after I admitted what I did, I immediately got pulled out of my position, and rightly so. Got sent back to Seoul to be administratively, to be disciplined,
Mm,
and then was sent on my way to my next duty station, which was in November of 2002.
mm.
So yeah, I was basically at the near the end of it when all of this finally came to a head. I was near the end of my tour.
Okay.
So I then came back home. My family stayed where they were, and I moved on to my next duty station to kind of get things set up for when they were going to be there.
Mm,
And honestly, things didn't get better when I was there.
mm.
It continued. I was in South Carolina at the time, and back then they didn't have a lot of casinos in South Carolina, so I did a lot of lottery and that sort of thing. And then, and this is one story, they were still in Wisconsin, which is where we had been stationed before I went to Korea. I was in South Carolina. It was a weekend. I was bored. I was stressed.
Mm.
I knew there was a casino on the other side of the state. So I'm like, okay, let me go try this out. I pulled a couple $100 out. I drive 6 hours to this casino on the other side of the state. I'm there for maybe 2 or 3 hours. Every dime I have is gone. I drove all the way back across the state. I took out a small loan that day, got the money, and then drove all the way back 6 hours to do it again, only
Wow.
to lose it in a couple hours again. It wasn't constant, but when I did it, boy, I just dove in feet first.
Sure. So, I
Yeah.
mean, we hear that as well in a lot of people's stories. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not a problem gambler because I don't gamble every single day."
Right.
But then the days that you do gamble, it goes as bad as it could possibly go. Now, at this point in the timeline, what does your family know about your gambling? Are they aware of what you're doing, or are you doing this completely in isolation?
My family was never truly aware of what I was doing.
Mm,
At this point, they're not aware at all. They have
mm,
no clue that I'm taking out loans, that I'm doing a bunch of stuff to get money. They have no idea.
mm.
My wife is sending me money because we're separated, so she's sending me money to put into an account. That money's evaporating almost instantly, and then I'm going out to in South Carolina at the time, they had all these little small loan places that you could go to. So I'd take out 1,000 here, 2,000 there, a couple hundred here. Meanwhile, I'm building up all this debt that I can't pay back because I'm gambling, because I have
Yeah.
nothing to pay it back with because, you reach the point where you're losing way more than you're winning.
Was this like high interest debt as well, or was it
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, it was a combination of, like, small personal loan, consumer type loans,
Mm.
but then also some of the predatory, 100, 200, 300% payoff type stuff. So, yeah, it was a combination of that.
And so you're taking out these loans, you're driving across the state. Is there a point in which you maybe hit an early climax in terms of the intensity of the gambling?
Yeah, interesting story. This was a weekend that, again, all this boredom came up, but I had no money.
Mm,
Now I'm in South Carolina. My mother lives in Pennsylvania, so I called her up and say, "Hey, can you lend me some money?" She's like, "Yeah, come on up. I'll take care of you." Right? She was going to write me a check. We
mm,
didn't have Venmo and all that back then. So I hop in my truck. I had a little Ford Ranger. I'm driving north. I'm getting through just out of North Carolina into Virginia. And as I am, it's raining, but the raining is now starting to turn into freezing rain. I get across the bridge from North Carolina into Virginia. And as I'm crossing this bridge, my truck starts swerving. So I'm like, okay, let me do what you're trained to do. I turn into it. I let off the gas pedal, the whole 9 yards. Well, I started spinning in circles.
oh,
Meanwhile, a tractor trailer is trying to pass me and slams into me while I'm crossing this
wow.
bridge, takes my driver's side door, pushes it in about 18 inches into the cab, right? I end up in the median strip. I'm okay. The first thing I think about is, where's my phone? Because I had one of those. I had an early cell phone. I'm
Sure.
like, where's my phone? And it had been thrown into the other side of the seat. Meanwhile, what I didn't realize is my whole cab had been crushed in a few inches, and had it been a few more inches, that would have been the end of my gambling career because it would have been the end of me.
Yeah.
But
Jeez.
as it turned out, I was okay. I got a ride back in a tractor trailer back to South Carolina. I never told my unit that I was leaving, and you're not supposed to do that. If you go
Mm,
without of a certain distance, you have to get approval to do it. Well, I never did that. So I got in trouble for that. And that stopped my gambling for a period of time. That
Jeez.
halted everything because I was too scared to do anything. And honestly, during that period, I really didn't miss it.
In like a almost near death experience like that situation, what was going through your mind in terms of like the following days when you started to reflect on it?
Part of me wished that the truck would have finished the job.
Wow.
If I'm being honest with you.
Mhm.
Part of me also thought this is a chance for me to reset
Mm.
and try to get it right, which I didn't do.
Mm.
I did not take that opportunity.
What was the next kind of event after that then? If you spent the next couple of months not really wanting to gamble, what sent you back?
Slowly but surely, kind of that drive and that desire. And this was more now of just filling that need to want to feel good.
Mm.
Now, my wife's down there, my kids are down there. I've got my family back together. We're reestablished as a family. I'm at my job. My relationship with my first wife, in reflection, was never truly what it could have been or should have been,
Mm.
right? There was always some tension between us. There was always disagreements. And a lot of that could have stemmed from who I was. I was very passive aggressive. I grew up in an abusive home, so I avoided a lot of different things. So it created a lot of arguments, and I needed to feel good.
Mm.
So I slowly but surely, the gambling started to build up again. And I took a second job at a restaurant. My wife never really questioned why I took that job, but yet I took it to get money to gamble with. And every single day, with no casino there, every day I'm driving to these stores to get this scratch off lottery, ridiculously just filling my car with garbage, which I had to eventually get rid of so that nobody would notice it, to the point where I got so confused. Now, this is now a couple years into our stay in South Carolina. I got so confused as to what I was doing. I had no idea why I couldn't control myself. I had no idea why I was so obsessive about this. I wanted to be there for my kids, so as they're growing up, that one day I felt so hopeless and lost that I had a bottle of painkillers I had for my back, and I just went ahead and took them.
Mm.
And I'm sitting in my office, and I can remember this. I ended up falling onto the floor of the office, passing out. And the next thing I know, I wake up in the hospital. I've got my boss on one side of me and my wife on the other side. And my boss is going, "You need to go see a counselor." I'm still hazy. I'm like seeing fog around me. And he's like, "We need to get you to see a counselor." Now, I
Mm.
wasn't at that time, I wasn't stationed on a military base. I was remote. So I went out and found a civilian counselor. My wife insisted on going with me. And at this time, it felt to me like she was nothing but demanding. I don't know if that's the truth, but through my lens, it just felt like it was nothing but demands. You'll do this, you'll do this, you'll do this.
Mm.
So of course I took her with me, and then I sat there and I just told the counselor what I thought she wanted to hear. Kind of plowed through that until the counselor said, "We're good," until my boss said, "We're good." Meantime, I'm gambling the whole time.
Huh.
It wasn't obsessive. I shouldn't say it wasn't obsessive. It wasn't in excess,
Sure.
but it was still obsessive. I still had to do it.
It's fascinating though, because when we think about it, because neither of us can really have the full perspective on this, but as the affected other in the relationship, as the person who's impacted by someone else's gambling, I wonder if the demandingness that she was exhibiting was motivated by fear. Maybe it was that she was scared that she was going to lose you. But at this time, like, it also wasn't clear that gambling was kind of a factor playing
Yeah.
in. Did they think that you were addicted to drugs, maybe? That you took the painkillers?
Drugs were never, no, that was never really brought up. It was
Mm.
more depression, anxiety, mental health type stuff. And you bring up a great point because, yes, she could very well have just been fearful of where I was headed, but just didn't really know how to approach it,
Yeah.
which is common with affected others because they oftentimes don't see this addiction.
Right.
They don't see it happening. They call it the hidden addiction for a reason.
Mm.
Because you can live this seemingly perfectly normal life. And you used the term high functioning earlier.
Mm.
Even through all of that, I was still high functioning in terms of being able to do my job.
Is there
So
anything that she could have done that you think would have worked at the time, or you just weren't there yet?
I want to say yes to both. Yes, I probably wasn't there yet, but I can also tell you, because I didn't understand what was happening myself,
Mm.
right? I can also tell you that if anybody had looked at me and said, "This is what I see. You're taking out a lot of money. You're spending a lot of money. You seem almost obsessive with this, and that concerns me," that may have created enough fear within me to step back and take a look at it. Am I saying it would have? No, I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm just saying for me, and I often say this about the military piece of this, is if somebody had looked at me and said, "You have a gambling addiction, right? This is a concern."
Mm.
That may have scared me enough to stop doing it for that moment and maybe look at different outlets. I
Mm.
don't know that for sure, but maybe.
I feel the same way because people always ask, like, "Hey, if someone said something to you about your gambling, would you have stopped?" And my
Yeah.
immediate thoughts, like, no, but maybe I would have stopped sooner than I did.
What I always say is, I wish I'd have been given the choice.
Yeah, back to the timeline here. So right now you are just coming out of seeing a counselor. You're kind of saying what everyone wants to hear, and you're still gambling on the side. When
Right.
does it begin to really pick up again?
So now I'm coming close to the end of this particular assignment. I get my next assignment, which is in Texas. My wife and I are so distant at this point. I'm not gambling ridiculously, but I am gambling regularly. So I'm very distant from her now. She and I are just basically not really talking
Mm.
a whole lot. So when I got my orders to go to Texas, she said to me, for the sake of our children, and I'm going to tell you rightly so, not that I would have been a threat to our kids. I would have never, ever physically threatened my kids. I care about them and love them more than I can possibly say, and did then too. But she said, to protect the kids, I'm staying here when you go there.
Mm.
So we essentially separated when I went to Texas. Meanwhile, I regained my rank. So I went down to Texas, and now here I am alone again. My kids are away from me again. And now, boom, it just explodes. I'm back to basically the things I was doing in Korea, just without casinos, because we didn't have anywhere I was. But I'm doing the same things. I had a whole bunch of furniture I took down there for an apartment I had gotten, sold every bit of the furniture. I didn't borrow from subordinates again, because at this point I was super, super scared to do it,
Mm.
but did end up stealing electronic equipment. Specifically, it was a digital camera that I stole and pawned. I was going around to different units and asking them if they had overstocks of MREs. And if you know what MREs are, meal ready to eat, okay? I would get all their overstocks, and then I'd go sell them to the Army Navy store to get money to gamble with. I'm doing all this ridiculous stuff. After I stole the camera, an investigation got started. This time, the way I got caught was I had been taken out of my apartment because I couldn't afford to stay there anymore, and was put on in a room on the base.
Mm.
Okay. Now it was for people like me, non-commissioned officers, a little higher in rank. So it was a decent room, but it was made up of, the walls are made up of what looks like right behind me brick. And I reached a point where I felt so hopeless that I cleared everything out on one side of the room, put my head down, and ran myself into the brick wall as fast as I could, as many times as I could, hoping to end it, trying to end it. When I couldn't do that, I ended up taking myself to the hospital. They put me into a civilian acute psychiatric ward in a hospital off base, where I spent 2 weeks. During that 2 weeks, the police showed up. I confessed. I said what I did. And then when I got out, I did get the camera back and gave it back and everything. But then also my commander and my officer in charge showed up. And now not only did I get in trouble again, but this time my commander said, we're letting you out of the Army. We're going to let you out under honorable conditions so you can go get the help you need.
Mm.
I'm grateful for that. And they did the right thing. Please don't misunderstand me. From a military standpoint, they did the right thing because they removed a distraction. They removed somebody who could do more harm than good. At the same time, to say we're doing it under honorable conditions so you can get the help that you need, nobody told me what that help looked like. I had seen counselors on the Navy base that I was stationed on, and again, we talked about things like depression and anxiety and stress and those things, but I don't ever remember anybody ever using the words gambling addiction with me.
If you were to think about it in kind of a metaphor, you were trying to fix the effects rather than the root cause of the problem. The
Yeah.
effect being the mental health, being in a bad place, the anxiety, the depression, the money, whereas the problem you think was solely motivated or mostly motivated by the gambling.
Yeah. I feel
Huh.
like they put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole is what I feel
Wow.
like. It was a lot of treating the symptoms versus getting to the problem. I don't want to be too critical of the military system because and to this day, I still believe they don't have the knowledge they need about gambling addiction to understand it well enough to approach it.
That probably goes for a lot of different groups. And I experienced something similar with my therapy sessions where I would go and I'd feel great after we left, but I'd
Mhm.
go and gamble because we weren't fixing a gambling problem. We were fixing
Right.
depression. But I was depressed because I was freaking broke. Like
Right.
it was like one cause and the other. But all right, so at this point in your life, you've now left the army. You've been told to go get help, but you don't know what that help looks like. Do you go and experiment with help, or does the gambling continue?
I went home to Pennsylvania, where I'm from. Um, Stopped in South Carolina to see my kids along the way and had a very amicable meeting there, but it was only for like 2 days, and then drove the rest of the way to Pennsylvania. And from there, I went down the rabbit hole, in and out of the VA to try and figure out what's happening. Went through 5 different jobs because the jobs kept interfering with my ability to gamble. And now the casinos are popping up all over Pennsylvania at this time. It's getting progressively worse. I ended up actually stealing from one of my employers again. This time it was a felony and a fair amount of money that I stole from them. But again, I turned myself in and I said something about it. My employer, and here was the strangest part about this, after all this went down, my regional manager came to me, my regional VP came to me and said, "Boy, we're really just considering bringing you back." To which I said to them, "No, you're not bringing me back. I need help." Even then, even saying that, I still didn't go get help right away. It wasn't until, and I've told you this story before about the weekend jaunt to the casino.
Please tell it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a Friday night. I take out, and it wasn't an overwhelming amount, maybe $500 I had, and I went down to, what was then my favorite casino. As I'm driving towards the casino, I'm in my head screaming at myself. I'm like, "Turn around, you idiot. You know what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of there with no money." I remember looking in the mirror, and as I'm screaming, I can see my face red. I can see the veins out. I can see the tears in my eyes, and I'm punching the roof of the car. And yet my foot's still on the gas pedal driving towards the casino. Get to the casino, get out of the car, still stressed as all get out, walk up to the door, open the door. I hear everything that's going on in there, and immediately, you might as well have shot me up. I was calm. I was happy. So went in there. This was on Friday night. I started gambling. I won pretty early on. Again, I didn't break the bank, but I won there was a couple grand that I won on my 5 grand. So I'm like, okay, now I have more money to stay and win more money, which was the mentality. If I can win this much, I can win more. And then of course the whole time I'm praying the gambler's prayer of, just let me get this big win and I'll pay off all my debts and I'll never do this again, which is BS. Kept gambling. And I'm finally getting near the end of my money. I can't wait to run out of money so I can stop gambling, but I won't stop gambling until I run out of money. Finally run out of money. I walk out. I'm thinking, okay, it's Saturday morning. I've been here overnight. Let me get in the car, go home, be depressed like I normally am, and then I can get through this. So I get in the car, I turn on the car, and I hear Sunday morning music. And I'm like, why is there Sunday morning music on Saturday? Well, it was actually Sunday. So I had been there for 36 hours, blew every single penny that I had, lost a day without realizing it. Barely ate, didn't drink anything, only went to the bathroom when it was absolutely necessary, ridiculously obsessed. Drove back home that day, and how I made it home on the gas I had, I'll never know. But drove back home, sat in the parking lot of my grocery store that all day, wondering what to do. Took a bottle of antidepressants while I'm sitting there. Realized that I wasn't trying to kill myself. I was just crying for help because I had no idea what was going on with me. Ended up in a hospital, in a psychiatric ward. I don't remember if it was a day or 2 days. I just know I drank a lot of charcoal. And then woke up and realized there was a paycheck in my mailbox. So, and again, I don't know how I did this, but I checked myself out against medical advice, went back, got that check, cashed it, went back to that same casino, and a couple hours later, I'm out of money again. And that's when I knew it was time. That's when I knew I needed help. Like I gave up. I'd given up at that point.
To someone that's listening that might not have a gambling problem, they would probably be thinking, you woke up in a psychiatric ward and you spent 2 days there. Why the hell did you go back again with that last paycheck? What was going on in your mind? What was the motivation when you had that paycheck?
I can win it all back. I can win it all back, and I can fix this right now. That's what my mind is saying, right? That's the logic that I'm creating for myself to do this. What's really going on behind this is I'm still ultimately just chasing that feeling of escape. I'm just chasing that feeling of mind-numbingly, because each time I do this, each time I spend all that money and I lie to somebody and I borrow from somebody and I take money, I'm creating more stress that I want to get away from. So it's cyclical, right? So I go gamble to get rid of stress, which just creates more stress, which then just creates the need to go gamble more.
Yeah.
So what's underneath the rationale of I can make this money and pay it all off really is I'm going to do this until I'm dead, because it just feels that good.
But you know what's fascinating, like looking back, is you're telling me now that you wanted to go back to solve this financial problem, that if you want all the money back, it would solve everything. But the enjoyment that you got from the gambling was the calming effect, the high of going and actually doing it. You were telling yourself you're going back for money, or you're telling yourself, I'm going back because I am a gambler? Like, what was the motivation there?
I'm telling myself I'm going back to fix all this. I'm going to win the big win, and then I'm going to walk away and I'm going to pay everything off.
Mm. So it
And
wasn't
then
even about enjoyment then at the end. It was just about survival.
pretty much, yeah.
Because it's very opposite to how it started.
Yeah.
And what the motivations were in the beginning.
Yeah. It went from I need to do this to I can't stop doing this.
Following that day, you got yourself some help? What happened?
Yeah. One of my visits to the VA that I had done, nobody had ever really addressed it. I mean, they talked a lot again about depression, anxiety. They draw little circles that where my family influence is, and we learned all this cool stuff until one day I was in front of one of the counselors who reached into her desk and pulls out this stapled packet of papers that had dust on it, right? And basically drops it in front of me and says, "Here, I don't know a lot about this, but you can look into it."
Mhm.
And it said VA gambling treatment program on it. Nobody helped me make the calls. I made all the calls myself. I checked into it and I discovered the oldest residential gambling treatment program in the country of any kind. Been around since 1972. Started by Dr. Robert Custer, who is a pioneer in this field. It's for veterans. It's for people who've been in the military. So I'm like, all right, let me make the call. I made the call, and inside of a month, I had a bed. At the time, it was in Brecksville, Ohio, which was a suburb of Cleveland. So I'm like, okay, let me try this out and see what happens. So I get in the car and drive out there. This was in 2007, by the way. On the way out, of course, I gambled all the money I had for my last hurrah. Got out there, got checked in, weighed in, set up in my room, got my first introductory intake with my therapist, and within minutes had discovered the first person that understood me and realized that, okay, maybe somebody can get this. Because the whole time leading up to that, the thought that would run through my head is nobody can understand the ridiculous thoughts that are going through my head right now. Nobody. I can't get anybody to possibly understand this, which is why I ended up with 4 suicide attempts, thinking that nobody could ever get it. Finally, somebody got it. So I got in, started with my 28 days there. In the meantime, they made me go to my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting, which was actually on the VA campus. And I walked there and I remember thinking to myself, okay, we'll go in, we'll sing Kumbaya, we'll hold hands, we'll move on. So I walk in there, we get these cool little yellow books and we read through all this stuff in the yellow book. And then the first person gets up and starts talking, and I'm thinking, how the hell does this guy know about me? And then the next guy gets up and I'm like, wait, this person knows about me too. And that's when I just started to discover the power of connection and just how powerful a group of people who understand what the group of people is going on, and they're all focused on the same thing, how much power that can have.
And now we're 17 years down the road. And what kind of work do you do today?
Well, there's a little bit in between there if I can.
Okay, please.
Because I got out of the VA and I was there for 2 years doing different things there. And as it was going on, I'm thinking, you know what? I don't have a desire to gamble. I have no urges. I don't want to gamble. I'm cured. I don't need these GA meetings anymore. I don't need this counseling anymore. I'm good to go. So I come back to Pennsylvania, and by the way, served a little bit of jail there in the meantime, because they had set me up on this program where if I kept making payments and I kept showing up, eventually they were going to expunge my felony. Well, I never attended it. So I got picked up and went through the legal system again. Never spent any serious time in there, and it did get resolved. But I got back to Pennsylvania, and as I'm reestablishing my life, I connected with the woman who's now my wife, who was also, by the way, my high school sweetheart, and that's a whole other story for another time. As I'm developing a relationship with her, I reconnect with my children, who are now both teenagers and older. And as we're developing this relationship, and she and I got together in 2011. So now we're talking, 4 years separated from when I went to the VA in Ohio. So we're together, and as we're developing this relationship, slowly but surely my addiction is rebuilding. But it's manifesting in a different way. So instead of me going to casinos and all that, instead what I'm doing is I had credit cards and loans out I never told her about. So I would take her out on these extravagant meals and she'd be like, well, are we okay? Yeah, I got this. We're good, right? And then what I would do is I would take out a loan to pay off the credit card so that she would never know that I had the credit card. So then I needed to pay off the loan. So then I would take off another loan to pay off that loan. And I just started to build this whole money snowball.
Yeah.
But the whole time the gambler's mentality is, well, I'll find a way to pay this off. I'm going to find that one miracle cure and I'll pay this off. That went on all the way through the fall of 2019, which is where the real havoc started to happen.
Wow.
So in 2019, it was probably August of 2019, my wife went down to Texas to go spend some time with her son who was working down there. While she was gone, I took my truck, which I had just paid off a couple months before, and I basically bought it back from myself. I went out and got a title loan on it because I'm like, I need to clear the books here and get everything straight. Went to a casino again with almost 20 grand, and within a couple hours was broke. Then I'm online and I'm looking online, and at the time there were these bunch of internet philanthropists online. So I'm like, ooh, I can get money back this way. I just need a hard knock story. Well, I ended up getting scammed for several thousand more dollars out of that. So by the time we get to the end of 2019, I'm in a fog. I'm desperate. I'm still functional. She has no clue what I've been doing this whole time. My wife. We get to the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. It's January 3rd of 2020. I said to her, I feel sick. I'm going to sit on the couch so I can get better. This was on a Friday, right? Well, I sat there the entire weekend deciding whether I was going to step back into recovery, admit what I had done, and go through the hell that I had to go through, or if I was going to take the knife that I had gotten, I think it was from the American Legion or somebody as a gift, and I had it all sharpened up, that if she had ever found out what was going on, I was going to walk to the back of my property, and I had an exit plan. So I spent that weekend deciding which way I wanted to go. And again, I tell this story often, but it's true. As I'm, God is my witness. I'm sitting here. This happened. As I'm sitting there that weekend, I get Morgan Freeman's voice in my head from Shawshank Redemption going, get busy living or get busy dying. Well, obviously I chose to get busy living.
Yeah.
And on Monday, January 6th, I took myself to my local VA. I told them that I wanted to hurt myself. I said, but before you check me in, I need to call my wife. And then I called her and I confessed to her. And let me tell you something, Rob. There are moments in my life that reinforce what I do today. That moment is one of them, because if you could have heard in her voice what I heard when I made that phone call, and just the absolute betrayal that I heard in her voice in that moment, after all of these years of thinking that everything I told her was true and I was being, upfront and honest, and I basically just yanked the rug out from under her and told her, nope, I've been pretty much lying to you the whole time we've been together. That moment will stick with me till the day I die. And yet somehow she stuck with me. So I went through my time there. I think I spent 3 or 4 days there. While I was there, I got myself readmitted to the gambling treatment program out in Cleveland. I started my GA meetings, my local GA meeting, which I still go to this day, now almost 5 years in. Went through the gambling treatment program, 5-week program out there. Had a counselor from there for the next year afterwards, and we would meet weekly, then monthly, then et cetera. Got another counselor at my local VA. Started my podcast, which is about military service members, veterans, and gambling. Wrote my book, which is it's a cathartic telling of my story, but going deeper beneath the gambling addiction, which I remember when I first went back into the gambling treatment program, my counselor said, what do you want from this program? And I said, what I want is to untangle what's beneath the gambling so I can stop this once and for all. And that's what we did. We started to attack who I am as a person, what's important to me as a person, and why do I avoid things that I'm afraid to talk about. And there was often times when even the smallest, dumbest little thing that my wife would ask about me, I'd want to hide it from her. And it was nothing that was impactful. It's just I wanted to hide. So I learned to stop hiding. And when I first did it, I would say to my wife, listen, I don't want to tell you this because I'm scared, but I'm going to tell you because I need to. And then I would tell her and she'd go, you were scared to tell me that? And I'd be like, yeah. I was, and just by practicing that, I've become more comfortable with, I don't hold anything back anymore. If something's coming up for me, I say it. And I do it in the kindest way I can.
Sure.
But I speak my mind. I say what I need to say now. I finished my degree in social science and was working on my master's in social work. Started working part-time for an addiction treatment center, alcohol and drug addiction treatment center. But they would allow me to work with and give additional support with people who had co-occurring gambling. And then I also worked with veterans while I was there.
That's awesome.
And then moved into telehealth, where now I work primarily with people who struggle with gambling addictions. I also work specifically with veterans. And now I work with also former professional athletes, because there's a strong kind of correlation between the military mentality and the athletic mentality. So I'm able to connect, I feel, pretty well with athletes in the same way I do with military people. So now I help other people in recovery. I attend meetings every single week. I run a group every week where a bunch of us get together who are in recovery for gambling, and we just talk about what our struggles are, what some of the different things that are working for us. The difference between me now and me in 2007 is in 2007, I knew I had a gambling problem. Now I know I'm powerless over it unless I do something about it.
It's amazing that, and I'm glad that you didn't just jump to what you do now and that you told the rest of that story, because if you look back now, you can pinpoint the exact conversation that more or less changed everything. And
Yeah.
had you not opened up and been honest with your wife, who knows what you'd be doing today, you know?
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
everyone that's watching that's scared to tell family, scared to tell their wife, their husband about what they've been doing, that's what very well could be keeping you in that cycle and holding you back from doing something great.
I think it's critical. You know, if somebody truly wants to find the way out, saying something and being transparent is so important. It's so scary, but it's so important.
If you could speak to someone that is kind of on the fence with their gambling right now, they've been doing it for a bit, started out great, they either won or they were having a really good time in the beginning, and now it's starting to get a little bit iffy. What would you tell that person?
If it's changing from I like doing this to I need to do this, say something now, because this addiction operates on a continuum. You're not going to snap your fingers and go from a normal casual gambler to a fully addicted gambler. There may be some people who cross the line that quickly, but for most of us, it operates on a continuum. And what happens is slowly but surely the need to do this starts to build up. If there's a feeling that I need to do this, like I have to go back, or if you find that the amount you're spending on this is increasing as you're going along, or the games that you're picking are getting riskier or faster, now is the time to say something, because if you don't say something now, there could be a very good chance that you move more towards the other end of that spectrum, which is where the real damage is done. If you haven't borrowed money yet, but you're considering it, you haven't lied to somebody yet about where you were or what you were doing, but you're considering it, now is the time to seek help. This disease is manageable. This disease is preventable. Educating people on what it looks like helps us in prevention to keep people from maybe getting to that point.
And why do you still do what you do, even though you've reached the point where you're living a good life, you're away from gambling? What makes you continue to do this work?
Number one, there are too many of us out there who don't know the dangers of this that need to. There are too many of us out there that don't get the help they need that need to. And number three, it keeps me connected to my own recovery.
If you want to know more about Dave, check out the description of this video for a description of him and the links to his websites and social media. Dave, thank you for joining. And to everyone in the audience, let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.